Working. Awesome. Okay, so my notes are up here, so I'm going to be up here, up and down. Thank you so much for having me. This is an absolute privilege. As some of you may know, my husband Brad is one of the pastors at The Rock, which is just over the hill. So this is our community as well, and we love it. And it's awesome to be in the Presbyterian church. My husband grew up in the Presbyterian church, so we have those roots. And there's an amazing man called Tim Keller who leads Presbyterian Church in New York City, who's one of my all-time heroes. So it really is a privilege to be here. For those who don't know me, my name is Christy. I have 3 children, Blake, Ryan, and Emily. Emily is 11. Blake and Ryan are twins. They're 9. And yeah, Brad and I have been married for 15 years this year. The chat has been going about 4 years now. It was birthed at a birthday party just by accident when a bunch of us, our daughters were turning 7, and we had this conversation, have you spoken to your daughter about sex? And none of us had, and all of us were terrified. And so I have a background in journalism and research and in teaching, and so I said, let's get together, get some information, and get ourselves clued up on this thing, because it's something we really need to do well. And so the chat was born in a dining room, in a lounge in Durban North, with lots of laughter and stumbling through this research that I'd done. And then it just turned out that parents were really, really hungry for good information about how to navigate this thing of sexuality with their children, because although most of us are terrified to do it, we all know that it's something, especially now more than ever, we cannot just let them sort of find out how they find out, which is the way most of our generation did, because most of our parents were too terrified to talk to us. And so the chat was born, and so I do those talks as well to parents, equipping them to talk to their children about sex. I do talks, I do workshops called Well Connected in schools, helping young people, specifically in primary schools, start to navigate social media and how to do that well. And then, yeah, I do stuff with teens, and it's just an absolute privilege. So now I give all my time to this. I've just written my first book, which I'll tell you a little bit about just now. And I'm working on another one, and I just absolutely love what I do. I'm very passionate about family, and so it's an absolute privilege for me to be here. If you don't mind, please just put up that first slide for me. So I just like to show this slide often at my talks, because this is the heart of the chat. This girl, it's from Humans of New York. For those of you who love photography, you might know Humans of New York. This girl is sitting in a station, and she's saying, I wish I'd partied a little less. People always say be true to yourself, but that's misleading, because there's 2 selves. There's your short-term self, and there's your long-term self. And if you're only true to your short-term self, your long-term self slowly starts to decay. And the reality is our children, and this generation, especially the what they call the iGen, everyone born after 95, are living in a time where, in an unprecedented way, there's this pressure to live in the moment, to seize it. If it feels good, do it. Follow your heart. You only have to walk into any department store to see it on every shirt. Own your truth. YOLO. It's this thing of just embracing everything if it feels good, and it's right for you. And so there's very little thought in those kinds of contexts for long-term self, for consequence, for the 20-something-year-old student, or the 35-year-old career woman, or the 40-year-old parent that you're going to become. And so my heart with the chat, and specifically what we're talking about tonight, is that we will equip our children, and for those teens who are with us, that you will make choices that are true to your long-term self, that if you spoke to your 25-year-old self, they would thank you for those decisions and the way that you navigated your life in terms of sexuality. And so I know that tonight we've got some teens, we've got some parents, we've got a bit of a mixture, so I'll swap between the two, and some of it will probably be more relevant for you than others. But one thing I just want to say up front is that as you listen to everything I'm going to say tonight, will you please listen to it with a future-focused lens? To be honest, God doesn't really care too much about the past. One of my favorite sayings at the moment is, don't look back, you're not going that way. So think of it with the lenses of your future. You may hear some of this stuff, and you may feel a certain way in terms of something you may have seen or done or been involved in. But I just want you to know that everything tonight is like, okay, so how does this impact where I go from now? How I live from today? How I'm going to operate in terms of my life from this day forward. And that's always, obviously there are things in our past that we have to deal with and move on from and get healing from, but it's always with our future in mind. And so before we start, the title of this talk is Sex, Selfies and Social Media, and I've grappled with this title so many times, but it's basically what we're going to talk about tonight is how do we live in a whole healthy way in terms of our sexuality in this day and age where we find ourselves, where so much of our sexuality is impacted by social media, where our lives are on display so much. How do we live well here? So first of all, let me take a sip of water before I carry on. A little bit about the sexual landscape where we find ourselves. So one social researcher put it like this. The 1960s were described as the era of sexual liberation. We will probably have heard of flower power and free love, which led in the 1970s to easy divorce, which led in the 1980s to the breakdown of family, which led to the 1990s, which was called the hookup culture, which led in the 2000s, which is the era we've just come out of, which we have called the redefinition of sex. And then the era we find ourselves now, social researchers are calling the end of sex, which parents may go, sure, then I don't have to have that conversation, but it's not a healthy indicator at all, the fact that even in marriage, people are having less sex than ever before. And there's lots of things that people are attributing this to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I was actually in a doctor's waiting room not so long ago, and I came across a National Geographic, and it was called The Gender Issue. So I picked it up. Obviously, I'm always researching and looking at these things. And what struck me was there was this glossary at the beginning, which actually explained the terms that I was going to encounter as I read. And these were some of the terms I came across: agender, androgynous, cisgender, gender fluid, intersex, non-binary, transgender, transsexual, bisexual, and pansexual. So these are all sexual orientations that are prevalent in the current social climate. And what's interesting, I was doing a survey online, a typo survey, and when I had to say what my gender was, I could choose between male, female, or don't identify with either. And so this is the place where our young people are finding themselves, where some people are saying you're assigned a sexuality at birth, a gender, but then you get to choose through your life whether you identify with that gender. So it's a very confusing place for young people to grow up in. And it can seem like a little bit of a minefield as we raise children, and for those who are teens, as we figure out our own sexuality. And the other day I was watching the Chronicles of Narnia with my kids, and gosh, I had two thoughts while I was sitting there. The first was, my goodness, animation, and it's not animation, what would it be? Special effects have come so far since this movie. And the other thing was, this is such an incredible picture of sexuality. The actual line, The Witch in the Wardrobe, you know, I don't know if you've seen it, where they go through the wardrobe and they go into this amazing land. And I was like, this is such a great picture, because sexuality is, as designed by God, this beautiful thing that we are meant to enjoy, explore in marriage, and actually is supposed to bring us much joy. But in the Chronicles of Narnia, you'll see that there's this 100-year winter in Narnia, and this beautiful place has been frozen over, and there's all sorts of dangers. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the dangers that we find in terms of sexuality a little bit later. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about the beauty of sex, just as a basis for tonight. So sex, as it is designed, is an absolutely beautiful thing. Being in church, I'm going to quote a couple scriptures. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says, God has made everything beautiful in its time, and that includes sexuality. Genesis 2:23 to 29 talks about God's original intent, that a man and a woman would be joined together in marriage, and that they felt no shame, and that they were free to enjoy each other and love each other, and that they would be fruitful. And Lisa Bevere, in her book, The Joy of Marriage, says God delights in its beauty and celebrates its purpose. Song of Songs is an entire book of the Bible that is dedicated to the beauty of sexual intimacy between a man and a woman. And when I was reading about this, it said that Jewish boys weren't allowed to read Song of Songs until they were 16 or 18, because it was considered so erotic. And John Mark Comer, in his book Loveology, says that sex is not an evil desire that we have to curb and deny. It's a gift that we get to enjoy as long as it's done in the right context. And so sex has lots of benefits in its correct context. The physical science of sex is absolutely incredible. So just a basic overview: when a man and a woman engage in sexual intercourse, there's a series of hormones that are released. In women, it's oxytocin. Interestingly, the same hormone we release when we breastfeed our babies that causes us to bond with our babies. And it's that hormone that makes us want to nurture and care for the ones that we are being bonded to, where we want to love them and we want to keep them with us. And then with men, it's vasopressin, which they call the monogamy molecule, or the jealous hormone, which is a hormone that's released that causes men to want to protect and take care of the one that they're bonding to. And then there are the endorphins, which they call the happy hormones, which cause us to want to enjoy that experience again and again. Now, obviously, really, really helpful in marriage, because when the Bible says that a man and woman will cleave together, will cement together, that is the science that backs it up, because these hormones cause an intense bonding to happen between a man and a woman. And interestingly, the more sexual partners we have, research shows the less of this hormone is released each time we have sex with another partner. And so when we have sex with one partner for life, there is the cementing that happens, and it helps us endure the hard times, the bad times, the sick kids, the in-laws, the financial problems, and it's kind of like this thing that keeps us together through thick and thin. But as I mentioned earlier, when you have multiple sexual partners, less of that hormone is released with every partner. And so if you have a series of partners before you choose your spouse, it's more like press stick than super glue when that bonding happens. And also, where this chemical is obviously unhelpful is when we have sex with someone we are not intending to marry, because we're bonding ourselves on a physical, chemical level in a way that is unhealthy. And then it's this bonding, and then it's this ripping, and it's bonding, and it's ripping. And we've all, maybe we all haven't, but I know I have, and I've experienced this, is where you have a friend who's with a partner, and you say to her, what on earth are you doing? This guy's treating you badly, he's no good for you, and all these things. And the reality is that sometimes, because of this chemical bonding that happened, it overrides our logic, and it causes us to stay with someone that we shouldn't do. And then also, this is also why often couples who live together, statistically, couples who live together have a much higher divorce rate than couples who don't, which is really interesting, because society will tell us the exact opposite. They will tell us, if you want to have a successful marriage, live with the person first. Make sure they don't leave their stuff lying on the floor. Make sure you're sexually compatible. Make sure they're not a slob, or they don't snore, or all those things. And then if you tick all those boxes, then think about think about marrying the person. But actually, statistically, if you live with someone before you marry them, your chances of divorce are much higher. And researchers explain it like this: is when we live with someone before we get married, most of the time, you're sleeping with that person. So you're bonding to this person on a chemical level and in a way that you possibly don't understand. And you're enduring stuff when you're actually with a person who you probably shouldn't be with, possibly shouldn't be with. And also, you slide into marriage rather than deciding to marry the person, because you move in together, so you're sharing a rent, you get a dog, you share furniture, and it's like the next step is like marriage, right? Whereas if you date and you abstain from having sex with the person until after you're married, you have this way of actually logically deciding if this is the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, without all that chemical stuff going on inside you, without the dog and the shared house key and all those complications. I've completely digressed, but I feel like that was important to say. So this physical thing is really important. Some other important physical things around sexuality: boosts the immune system, helps maintain healthy weight, lowers blood pressure, lowers the risk of heart attack, and a lot of good side effects, but only obviously in a safe married context. Now, I've spoken a little bit about this, but there's also a very deep spiritual side to sexual intimacy. Anne Voskamp, who's an amazing writer, says this. She says, our bodies and our souls are profoundly connected. The union of two bodies is nothing less than the union of two souls. Do not do with your skin, and I tell this to all the high school students I speak to, do not do with your skin what you're not ready to do with your whole life. Because we cannot disassociate body and soul. And social media will tell us we can. And this is one of the greatest dangers of social media. There's this disconnect that happens between the person there and the person here. But when you send a naked photo of yourself to your boyfriend, that is not a disconnected part of you. That is you being cemented to another person in a sexual, intimate way. And somehow when it's online, there's this disconnect that happens, which is actually completely untrue. And obviously, it's incredibly dangerous when we try and separate the two. There's no such thing as casual sex, no matter what Hollywood tells us. No matter what your friends may say, there is a profound, deep thing that happens every time we are sexually intimate with someone. And it's a profoundly beautiful thing in a marriage. And actually, that's why in 2 Corinthians 7, Paul tells married couples to have as much sex as they can, or to have sex regularly. Let me not misquote Paul. To have sex often, because it is such a profoundly powerful thing. Okay, so if sex is this beautiful thing, what are some of the dangers that we face and that our children are facing as they grow up in this era? So one of the greatest dangers is a lack of information. So we find ourselves in this crazy sexual world of so many different kinds of sexual orientations and so much stuff going on. So how did we get here? I love this quote from Chris Valentin. He leads an organization called Moral Revolution. And he says, how did we get here, you ask? That's a great question. Although there are many complex issues that have affected the erosion of morality, the single most destructive factor at the root of the entire demise of morality is the absence of healthy sexual instruction at home. That's the bad news. The good news is that parents have the power to transform the nations in one generation. The strategy is simple yet profound. If parents develop a healthy sexual culture at home, where children grow up hearing the truth about their sexuality, it will alter the landscape of morality in a single generation. And so a lot of what our young people are facing is because their parents are just not talking to them about these very, very pressing issues. And so our kids are hearing stuff, and our teens are hearing stuff all the time about sexuality, and our children are hearing stuff all the time on the playground, wherever they go, and they need us to help them filter through what they're hearing. If you think not my child, I think that's a dangerous thing to say, because our children are hearing stuff that even they don't understand. And so we need to equip and envision them to make decisions that are true to their long-term selves. We don't want them carrying piles of baggage into their marriages. We want them to go in as free as possible. And so we need to be, from little, we need to be having conversations with our children about sexuality. Some of you have been to my talks about that. I actually wrote this book. It came out this year. And I just wanted to show it to you because I've called it the Birds, Bees, and Destinies, because it's really important that as we talk about sexuality with our children, and this is a book about sexuality and about sex, is that our children know that it's not just about the birds and the bees. It's about their lives and about their destinies. And if we don't talk to our children about sex, we are telling them that it's a taboo subject, that it's something shameful, and we want to be the trusted experts. So if our kids want, and even our teens, we want to try and develop safe spaces where no questions are off limits, where our kids can come to us with everything. You just have to practice your chat face. You may have to Google, like I do often, around some of the terms. But I want to tell you two examples of why it's very important for us to have these conversations. The one, I have this friend who, she's been on the chat journey with me pretty much the whole time, and she's had wonderful conversations with her children around sexuality, and her son is the same age as Blake and Ryan. He's 9, and about 2 months ago, he was on a laptop with his dad, and they were just Googling lyrics to a U2 song, and a porn pop-up came up. As they do. The full-on porn image came onto the screen, and the dad slammed the laptop shut, hoping that his son hadn't seen it and didn't say anything more. And a few days later, the son came to him and said, "Dad, I can't get those pictures out of my head." And I just said to her, "You're so lucky that he came to you," because a lot of children, and especially, the reason he came to her is because she's been so open with him around sexuality, and she's prepared him for these moments. And so she was able to navigate that thing with him. She was able to talk with him. She prayed with him, and she's able to process with him. She was like, "Remember what I told you sex was? Remember this beautiful, powerful thing that I explained to you? Well, sometimes people take that thing that is beautiful and they turn it into something ugly." But he had this. There's this thing called the law of first mention. And it worked in her favor in this case, because his first mention of sexuality was this beautiful thing that God had created. And so when the ugly came, he could weigh it against that, and he could process it through that. And another slightly lighter story. A friend of mine was reading my book with her sons, and she has one son who is 11 and one who is 8. And so she read it it's kind of designed for 6 to 10, when you're ready to have the conversation. It's like that conversation. So, that conversation. That conversation. That was a very hard picture to illustrate, guys. Just saying. I didn't draw it. To come up with the concept. Anyway, and so she read it with the 8-year-old, and he was like, "Oh, Mom, this is so lame. Do I have to read this?" And she's like, "Sit here, I'm reading it to you." And she read it with him. And then the next night, she's like, "Okay, I'm going to read it with my 11-year-old, just to cover my bases, make sure, there's nothing that I've missed or whatever." And so she's reading it with her 11-year-old, and now the 8-year-old is peering around the door, because he's like, "Oh, this is probably, if my 11-year-old brother thinks this book's cool, it's obviously cool." So he comes and sits on the bed, and the dad comes and sits on the bed, and they read through the whole book, and then the little one, the older boy, says, "But Dad, how does the penis get in there?" And so he has to talk about some specifics and what. And then the boy goes, "Oh, that's what a boner is." Sorry, you probably shouldn't say these words in church. But I'm saying it because this little boy had heard these words in the playground. He goes to an all-boys school, but he didn't know what they were. So often children are using words that they don't understand, especially in all-boys environments. And we as parents need to open those conversations so that we can process them. And so when there's there's always terms being thrown around. If you remember high school, there's always stuff, and you just pretend like you know what they're talking about, because you don't want to be a dork. And so I want my kids to be able to come home to me and say, "Mom, what does that thing mean?" And so we have to be having these conversations with our teens. The other danger, obviously, is completely wrong information. Our teens are being bombarded with information all the time, and the thing is, it's often presented on social media as fact. And so we receive it as fact. We're all guilty of getting those SMSs that go, "Alert, this comes from an official government person. There is a bomb at Sunningdale Pharmacy. Evacuate the area." And we all pass it to everyone in your contact list. And then because it says it comes from Sergeant whoever at the SAPS, we all just send it. Any 12-year-old could be sitting at home creating something, and we just send it, because often when we get stuff online, we see it as fact. And that's happening to our children all the time in terms of their sexuality. And it fundamentally also boils down to the fact that lust is sold to us as love all the time. Every single romantic comedy we watch, basically, "I love you" means "I think you're hot and I want to sleep with you. And if you love me, you'll want to sleep with me too." And the reality is that we need to change the way our children see this, and we need them to identify the difference between the two. And it's actually very simple. I'll just give you a few examples. Love is patient. Lust is in a hurry. So if someone's in a hurry, that's not love. Love is selfless. Lust is selfish. It's about my needs. Love is in it for the long haul. Lust is about right now. Love is about wooing, about relationship, about friendship, and about future self. Lust is a primal animal desire. I've bred Labradors, and I know what that looks like. We have one of my friends who has a beneficiary of my Labrador. And that is, and love is an act of will, and it is selfless, and it is something where we put another one first. Lust is about impulse. Love is about self-control. The two could not be more opposite if they tried. Love leads to long-lasting, healthy relationship, and lust leads to addiction, inability to be truly intimate, shame, and the death of relationships. And we need to know the difference, especially as teenagers. There's an amazing woman called Caroline Leaf who does brain research. She's a brain scientist. If you can get her books, read them. They're amazing. And she's done research in terms of teens and sexuality. And one of the things she says is a 20-second hug between two teenagers can override your logical brain. So you may think, no, we're not going to do anything. My boyfriend and I have decided this is kind of But if you're alone at home, late at night, with no parents, and you hug for 20 seconds, your brain switches off. Your logical brain switches off, and your hormones take over. It's not derogatory, it's not condescending, it's just the way our bodies are wired. And so our children need to know the difference between these emotions, and they need to know who they are and what they want, and they need to put good, practical things in place. Dating in groups, not being alone late at night, all those good things to keep their future self in the forefront of their minds. Social media is playing a massive role in how our teens and even how we see ourselves. Our online self is a commodified self. It's measured in likes and shares and followers and comments. And the more likes we get, the more we value ourselves, actually. I was listening to a speaker who works in Amsterdam with college students, and he's seeing this rise in suicide and suicidal tendency because of the pressure of having an Instagram-worthy moment every single day. And so our children are growing up under this pressure of their lives being measured online all the time. And for a lot of our young people, their online lives are actually more significant than their real lives because there's a lot more witnesses and there's a lot more people watching them, a lot more people evaluating them, and it's where they're finding their connection and their significance. But the problem is that although social media promises connection, it actually delivers a faulty connection. It's not a true deep connection based on face-to-face relationship, vulnerability, and truth. It's a superficial connection. And obviously, I mean, I love social media, and social media can enhance relationships, and it can foster relationships. A lot of when I do talks with young people, a lot of the first children to get phones are often from divorced homes because they want to keep in touch with their dad or their mom. And so a lot of the little ones, 7, 8, 9, they have phones to keep in touch. And there's a massive danger component there. But I was thinking about it today, and I was thinking, before when there was a divorce, the child probably only saw their dad every 2 weeks, but now they actually get to talk to their dad on a daily basis. And so there are some positive things. But the reality is this generation called the iGen they're being described as the most connected but the most lonely of all generations. And I don't know if I said this to you guys already, but this generation is drinking less, having less sex, they're less inclined to go out, get part-time jobs, want to drive, all those things. And it's boiling down to the fact that they're spending a lot of time at home in their bedrooms, on their phones, or on Fortnite, or on all kinds of social media where they're connecting to their friends and possibly to other people, but they're losing a whole lot of that face-to-face. I mean, I always ask, when I speak to grade 8s and 9s, I always ask them, would you break up with someone face-to-face? And they're all like, are you mad? Would you ask someone out face-to-face? Never. Never. Why would I do that when I can do it on WhatsApp? It's so much safer. I can delete, retype until I've got this perfectly crafted breakup line. And then I don't have to see her crying face. I can just see her crying emojis coming back at me. And so this is kind of where, so this reality of social media is, and how that it's impacting our young people is massive. And we need to connect to, we're kind of losing the connection with the people around us and creating these connections out there. I'll just share a little bit of a vulnerable story with you guys. I've already quoted him once enough, but there's this guy called John Mark Comer who's an amazing teacher. He leads a church with his wife in Portland in America, and I listen to his preachers, I read his books, and because I listen to a lot of his stuff, I know a whole bunch about his life. It's quite weird. Like, I know they've just got a dog, I know the names of his kids, I know that his wife does CrossFit and he runs. I know they've just moved house. I know all these things about him. And then the other morning, because I am a bit of a fan, as you can tell, I woke up and on my Instagram notifications was this notification, John Mark Comer has requested to follow you. Well, I'm like, I have arrived, guys. I'm clearly doing something significant in Durban, and John Mark Comer wants to follow me. So I screenshot it, show my husband, send it to one or two friends. I'm like, this is amazing. I was like, should I? Let me think. Okay, accept. And I'm like, this is quite cool. I'm like quite excited. I'm quite excited for about 2 hours until I go onto Instagram again and I see John Mark Comer posting this thing. If you've got any friend requests from me, I've been hacked. Okay, it was a very sad moment for me. The reality is John Mark Comer does not even have a clue who I am, never will. And you know what, that's fine. He's an amazing teacher, I glean from him, but it was such an amazing thing for me to realize that you can actually get so invested in the life of somebody you're never going to meet, and just because you admire them, you know? And so what we need to be encouraging our kids and ourselves to do is to invest in the relationships of those who are with us. Because, I mean, that was quite funny, and my husband had a good laugh, and my friends had a good laugh at me. But the reality is imagine that was a high school girl and the head boy who she thinks is amazing or whatever, just an example. And then it's like, oh no, I didn't actually want to follow you. You were hacked. You're actually such a loser. And thanks, but no thanks. It has such a massive impact on our hearts and minds. And so social media is having a massive impact. And because it has such an impact on our identity and how we view ourselves, we often, if we're feeling insecure, we often use sexuality and we often use those things to prove that we are good enough. And so it's having a huge impact. And obviously online, the most devastating thing that is impacting our teens in their generation is pornography. Hands down, the biggest impact. And it is a devastating force, and it is it's impacting all of our children. The average age that a child in South Africa is exposed to porn is 11. That means some of them are earlier, some of them are later. But this is not an unrealistic statistic. I speak to people all the time whose children stumble upon pornography and are very, very negatively. It is highly addictive. I mean, I could spend all night ranting about porn, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you a couple things. It is documented prostitution. It is fed by human trafficking. It is highly, highly addictive. I've spoken to teachers of grade 3 boys who are addicted in our city. This is not like some inner city American story. In our city who are addicted to pornography, because there's such a shame component. But when children stumble upon pornography, because there's this spike of dopamine in their brain that they don't understand, once they come off, although they are repulsed by it, there's a component in their brain, because there is a chemical thing that happens, that actually they want to go back and see it again often. And so it is highly, highly addictive. And the children who are most at risk of becoming addicted are those who are kind of at risk, who are vulnerable, who maybe have unstable home environments, who are maybe being bullied or ostracized, because it does have that numbing component as well. Erectile dysfunction is a very common side effect. Men in their 20s, inability to have a relationship with a woman. It's sold as a way to enhance your married life, but it never will. It brings shame. It leads to depression. It is not only a guy problem. 1/3 of all porn viewed in South Africa is viewed by women. So we need to protect our girls against this and not just our boys, although it is a massive problem for young men. I just want to see what I want to... this is another thing, is 85% of porn includes physical aggression, and often it is without consent. And so we have this generation of boys being told through pornography that consent is optional, and that actually sometimes girls like to be forced upon. And so it's completely skewing that. Children are targeted with pornography, and yeah, they are there's ways that websites are built that you can be searching fidget spinner, and within two hops you're on a porn site. So it's we have to be extremely vigilant about it. It is the complete opposite of what sexual intimacy was meant to be. The worrying thing about pornography, I went to an addiction workshop focused on the family had recently, and this statistic blew my mind, is 89% of teens and 95% of young people view porn in a neutral or encouraging way. And so there's this tide of culture turning that pornography is either a good thing or it's an okay thing. It's not seen as a devastating force that it actually is. But interestingly, 1/3 of divorces in the US are attributed to pornography. When they say, why are you getting divorced? Pornography is stated as the thing. So if it is so good or harmless to marriage, why is it devastating so many marriages? It is incredibly important that we protect our children against pornography. I've stumbled upon these 2 books. You can come and take photos of them afterwards if you want to, but they are outstanding. This one is meant for very little kids, and this is slightly older kids. I read this to my daughter who's 11, but they talk about pornography in such a thorough way without being gross. Does that make sense? And so this is always my concern with talking about pornography with my kids, is I don't want to put ideas in their heads. So they might think, well, what is this thing that my mom's talking about? So they talk about bad pictures and good pictures, and they equip them just with tools of what to do when they come across pornography. They have this cool little thing called Can Do, which is cover your eyes, always tell an adult, distract yourself. Anyway, name it, distract yourself. It's all in here if you want to see it. But we need, if our children have access to the internet of any kind, we need to be talking to them about pornography. Because remember that law of first mention. If we equip them before with what sex is supposed to be, and when we talk to them about the danger of pornography, then they're forearmed. And when they come across it and they're like, this is weird, and I don't really know what to do with it, they'll be like, oh yeah, my mom told me about this, and she told me to come and talk to her, and we can preempt it like that. Super, super important. And pornography is an addiction, and it's something that that people, if you are involved in pornography, you need to get help. It is not something that is easily fought on your own. Parents, be wise with your in your homes. We were talking about this earlier, do not, and I'm giving you a challenge tonight. Do not take your own phone into your bedroom. And you're all going, it's my alarm clock. You know what? There's one shop at Gateway I know that sells alarm clocks. Go and buy yourself an alarm clock. And then set an example for your teens, because why are we saying to our teens, don't take your phones into your bedroom? If we're taking our phones, yes, we're the parents, and I get that, but actually it cuts into our own sleep. We know that. But don't take, honestly, pretty much every horror story I hear is a child or a teen in their bedroom on their own with their device or with their smartphone. It's taking away from our teens' sleep. My friend's daughter's 15, and she's like, gosh, my daughter was so tired, and I wasn't sure why. I thought, gosh, she's studying so hard. I'm so proud of her. And then I realized her and her friends were having all-night conversations on WhatsApp because she was in her room on her phone. And it's not like a law thing. It's like, this is sensible, guys. My friend has what they call digital sunsets. they literally switch all their devices off at sunset, which I think is a little extreme. I'm not sure I could do that. But maybe make it 8 o'clock, where every device goes into that charging station in the lounge, and you actually give your brain a rest from the bombardment of social media and all those things. And then we protect our kids from stuff that goes down when they're on their own in their bedrooms. And don't be that cool mom who goes like, here's the Wi-Fi password, have fun. And then they all go into the bedroom with their phones. I had a conversation with a friend the other day whose son had just started high school this year, and they had a rugby tour come to their school, local boys' school. And she'd been really vigilant with her son, and she had all the right conversations, and things were really, really on track. And these 3 boys came to stay with their phones, and they introduced him to porn in his bedroom on their phones. And so it's just wisdom. And you know what? We don't have to go with the cultural flow. And I think this is where it's important that in our homes we make our own decisions with our teens and actually equip them to make decisions that are helpful for themselves as well. And this is where I encourage teenagers, and I encourage you guys, be leaders. You don't need to go with the flow. I had an experience not so long ago. Actually, it was probably about a year ago now. I absolutely love to swim in the sea, so I belong to this WhatsApp group of swimmers. And basically the sum total of our WhatsApp conversations are, what are the conditions tomorrow? Looking good, looking terrible. Okay, let's meet, hopper 7, cool, who's in, who's out. That's it, okay? There's not much interesting stuff that goes on. And the one day I was driving back from the South Coast, and I was coming up our Queen Nandi Drive, and my daughter had been looking at photos on my phone, and I'd be like, okay, put my phone down. And then I got to the top of Queen Nandi and I checked my phone, and there's like 20 messages on my swim group. And for a swim group, for a WhatsApp group where the predominant age is like 40, 20 messages is like a whole lot. And I know if you're under 16, that's like just everyone saying hi before you actually start the conversation. But this is a lot. I was like, what is going down on the swim group? So I opened it up, and I was faced with porn. One of the guys had put a pornographic image on our swim group. And so I flicked up like this to get it off my screen, and I looked at his next comment, and it was, oops, wrong group. Okay, so 2 thoughts. Number 1, there's a right group for a 40-something-year-old esteemed member of our community. There's a right group for naked, explicit photographs of women. Okay, that blows my mind, number 1. Number 2, my daughter had my phone 5 minutes before. So this like angry mom rose up within me. Fortunately for him, I had till I got home to calm myself down and think about what I was going to say. But honestly, guys, I couldn't let it go. I was like, I've read too much, I've researched too much, I've heard too much, I've seen too much to actually go, ha ha, that was a bit offsides. It's just like, that is not an appropriate response, which is actually what the response is. They were like, aish, gross, da 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 da. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to say. So I basically said, guys, love swimming with you, love communicating with you, but I know I've seen too much damage done by pornography to actually expose myself or my family to this kind of filth. And so I'm going to leave the group, and I will communicate with you in a different way. And then it's Christy has left the group. And so what was interesting to me after that was within the next 10 minutes, I had 5 to 10 messages from people on the group going, I'm really sorry, well done, that was really brave, and I completely agree with you. Because you know what, actually, most people agree, but there's just sometimes someone needs to take the first step. So as teenagers, I would say align yourself with people who have the value system that you have, and stand together and be that person who goes, I've left the group, I actually don't need this in my life. Because what's interesting is that other people will often follow, and you actually create space for people to make better decisions. So a couple of other ways of how do we live in freedom? How do we get this thing right where we are? Number 1 is we actually need to know who we are. We need to know that and that's why, as I said, my book is Birds, Bees, and Destinies, is that our sexuality is not just about sexual intercourse. It's about one day the person you're going to marry, and it's about your life and the plans for your life and where your life is going, and that you can't just follow your heart. Our hearts, we are human, are a mixed bag of good and bad. And so we need to look at our hearts, and we need to nurture the good, and we actually need to stand against those things that are going to take us on a horrible path. Parents, as I said, we need to establish ourselves as the trusted expert in sexual things. And we need to, if we are living in sexual trauma, or if there's things that have happened to us that we are not free in terms of our own sexuality, we need to get help, because that is the legacy that we're going to pass on to our children. If we are too terrified to talk about sex because of something that happened to us, we need to get help so that we can actually, from this generation on, something different can happen. We need to be doing that for ourselves and for our children. And equally important is we need to know who we're not. We may have made some really bad choices. We may have done some really bad things. We may have had some really bad things done to us. But we are not the product of what we have done and what has been done to us. We are so much more than that. I didn't live in a way that I'm proud of as a teenager. I didn't make the choices that I wished I'd had. As a teenager, I slept with my boyfriend, and it led to 8 years of disaster, of me staying with a man that I knew I shouldn't be with, a boy, a man. And looking back, and I know the research and I know the science, I'm like, oh, that's what happened. And then I had my daddy issues, and I had this issue and that issue, and I understand. But the reality is that for years I carried regret and shame, and which many people do. And one thing I just want to hit on the head tonight is shame. Shame comes quickly in terms of sexuality. It comes quickly with pornography. It'll shut our children down. It'll shut us down. And we need to be very careful of the language we use. That friend of mine who saw pornography on her son's phone, she just phoned me in tears. She's like, I need to talk to you. And fortunately, she hadn't spoken to her son yet. All I wanted to say to him is, you are such a disappointment, and I'm so ashamed of you, and this is not how I brought you up. And that would not have been helpful, because shame shuts us down. And guilt is a good thing. Guilt is that, and actually there's some things we should feel guilty about, because guilt causes change in us. But shame says we are something wrong. Guilt says we've done something wrong. Shame is about being, and guilt is about doing. And so guilt is like where it actually brings us to a place of repentance and causes us to change our lives. But shame, actually I heard this preached this weekend, shame is the one emotion that God never intended us to feel. Because in the garden, they were naked and without shame. And so that is where he wants us to live, because that's where we can actually find wholeness. And so be very careful, parents, in how you talk about things. Unconditional love is really important. Yes, consequence. Consequence is very important. Boundaries are very important. And those are things that teach us. But shame is something that Brené Brown writes some brilliant stuff about shame. And she says it's the most destructive relational force of all time. It's the enemy of connection and belonging. And so I just want to encourage you that when we think about things, if we're feeling shame, that's not helpful. If we're feeling guilt and it causes change in our lives, that is where we want to be. And so if you are feeling shame, we need to get help in that. And something really, really important, and this is for parents, and actually for all of us, is I saw some very fascinating research recently that said the opposite of addiction is connection. So we always think the opposite of addiction is sobriety. And this scientist was like, no. He kind of did this research. So basically, scientists had done this research. They put a rat in a cage with normal water and cocaine water. And the rat, after tasting the cocaine water, only ever wanted the cocaine water. And so they're like, okay, addiction is about chemicals. It's about once you've had that, your body's dependent. Da, da, da. So this scientist, see if I can find his name here. He's somewhere, yeah. He basically said, I think there's something more to it. So he created Rat City. So he created this big cage, rat moms, rat dads, rat friends, rat brothers and sisters, rat park, stuff to play on, stuff to eat, comfy places to sleep, all these things. And then they did the same thing, cocaine water, normal water. And all the rats tasted both. They tasted the normal water and they tasted the cocaine water. And every single one of them, without exception, after tasting the cocaine water, never wanted it again. And so his conclusion is that when we have healthy connection, when we have a community, when we feel like we belong, where we feel like we're valued, we are way less likely to engage in unhealthy behavior. And I can go on and on about how they've implemented this in Portugal, and it's just incredible research. But my point really is that connection with our kids, and where our children feel connected to their families and connected to the people and unconditionally loved. Even eating one meal a day, research shows, with your family, your kids will get better grades. This is on my social media if you want to check it out. It's in a fascinating article. Less likely to do drugs, less likely to get involved in any risky behavior if you have one meal a day around the dining room table with your kids. And it's not about the meal, obviously. It's about the connection. It's about the belonging. It's about a safe space to talk about things. And so parents, we need connection with our kids, and we also need connection with each other. We need, and I said this already to teens, align yourself with people who have the same value system as you. It's very hard to do things alone. And the last thing is to embrace your season. It's really important. Teenagers, I'll speak to you guys first, is that often we want to rush things. And I know I did as a teenager, but we need to embrace where we are. We need to take courage. It's going to take a lot of courage. It's very courageous to live counterculture and to live in a way that is thought out and crafted in a life for yourself. But it's going to take courage. And if you are struggling, talk to your folks, talk to your parents, and don't let shame shut you down. I heard such an interesting thing not so long ago where there was this teenager, and it was a forum, kind of like what I do with schools, and he admitted, he was in matric, and he admitted to his peer group that he had got his girlfriend pregnant. And so his friends were like, so what's your advice? Like, what shouldn't we do, like, to avoid these things happening? And his answer was so interesting. He was like, don't drink. Don't drink. He says, you can talk about future self, one good decision at a time, align yourself with your friends. You have 3 drinks, forgotten, gone. So it's just about making really good decisions for your future self. And dating, I just want to talk about this too, because this is something that parents have to navigate and is so hard for parents. So this is kind of for the parents and for the teens. A couple of things that I've heard that are really helpful, because this is something I've still got quite a little bit of time to wrap my head around, and I still don't have an idea of what I'm going to do. But a couple of things about dating. The best definition I've ever heard of dating is that dating is practicing loving someone well. Dating is not about fulfilling your own desires and about making yourself look cool because you're dating the popular guy, about being less lonely. It's about practicing for marriage one day, how to honor someone, how to respect someone, how to open doors for someone, how to put boundaries in place, and how to cultivate healthy relationships. The other thing about dating that I heard, which I found really interesting, is for the guys out there, I'll flip it for the girls as well, but for the guys, if you're not dating your own wife, you're dating someone else's wife. So don't do anything that one day when you look in the eye of the person who is married to her that you feel ashamed of. Treat that girl how you're hoping some guy's treating your future wife one day. Another thing, and in terms of our sexuality nowadays, so if you're studying to be a doctor, you're willing to work, if you decide you want to be a doctor, you work hard, you sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff at school to get those A's so that you can get into medical school. You work hard at medical school when other guys are jolling. You're working, because you've got this vision of what you want your life to look like in terms of your career and all those things. And so you do all the hard work, and then one day you're a doctor. And you get to do the career, you get to have the overseas holidays, you get to have the nice house, you get to do all those things because you've put in the hard work. Why don't we do that with relationships? Why do we want to have all the fun now, instead of putting in all the building blocks and as we're dating, self-control, respect, boundaries, hard conversations, all those things. So one day when we do get married, we can enjoy the fruits of a relationship that don't have all that baggage and things with them. It's kind of, we flip it on its head in terms of relationships. So just really important to think really strategically about our relationships. Married couples, I heard this really funny thing. When you have small kids, getting lucky means they're both asleep at the same time. So hopefully in your marriage you get past that stage. But I just really, really encourage you to invest in your marriage. Whether your marriage is hard or easy, but to invest in it, because it's God's plan is marriage, and it is the union of two very imperfect people. But it's something that's often, especially when we have kids, gets put on the back burner while we kind of figure stuff out and get through the day and through the night and through these times. We need to invest in our marriages. Again, if things are not good, don't let shame or fear or exhaustion or apathy shut you down. We're all on a journey, but we really need to be pursuing this. And parents, like I said, have conversations with your kids. What we think and feel about sex shapes what they think and feel about sex. And so we need to be very careful not to be passing our insecurities onto them. Our children will probably follow in our footsteps. Our boys will probably treat women like my boys will probably treat women like Brad treats me. And our girls are looking at how their dad treats us when they look at what kind of spouse they want one day. And yeah, everyone makes mistakes, and we're all navigating the sexuality, and it's not an easy space we find ourselves in. There's so much going on all the time. But what I take courage in is the fact that God is not taken by surprise. Like God says in the Bible, I know the times and places you will live. So the iPhone wasn't invented, and God said to Jesus, oh my gosh, I did not see that coming. I have no idea what we're going to do. This is like beyond my skill set. Call Holy Spirit because we need a conference. He knew. He knows that we're living here. He knows that our kids are living here. He knows about social media. And you know what? There's some really positive ways we can use social media to enhance our lives. And honestly, like Chris Valentin said, it actually all boils down to connection, conversation, authenticity, and vulnerability in our homes, where we can talk to our children, and actually for ourselves as well, that life is not about the pursuit of happiness. We don't have to be happy all the time, because that's what social media tells us. We should be happy all the time. We should be having this amazing life. What we want to do is we want to raise children, and we want to be people of purpose who give sacrificially, who invest in our communities, who make an impact, who do cool stuff, who think about cool stuff, who are creative. And the byproduct of that kind of life is joy. And actually, those are the lives that we want to craft for ourselves. And so, yeah, just as I close, we can reclaim this version of sexuality that God created for us. We can do it. It's not easy. It takes some tough decisions. It takes self-control. But actually, when we make those good decisions and when we put those things in place, that is actually where we flourish. There's a quote that I read the other day that face-to-face connection is the wellspring of human flourishing. And so just as we go, I just encourage you, foster face-to-face connection in your homes and in your communities. Open conversations. Use books like mine to open conversations with your children. Talk about these things and actually journey these things with them. And so that when they become teenagers, these conversations, there's a safe space created. And even for our own lives, that we would start to foster healthy, open communications in our communities, where whether people are broken or whole or struggling with stuff, we're journeying this together. Let's talk about this. Let's help each other. And actually believe that when we do things in a way that God created and intended, we can flourish and we can do it well. And so, I just encourage you, do not be disheartened. Just use social media well. Put things in place in your homes that create time for those connections. That create time for you to navigate things together. And just make bold choices and leave those groups that you need to leave. Do a social media audit every few weeks, and you don't have to be friends with everyone on Facebook. You don't have to follow everyone, even your friends. We need to craft our lives rather than being swept along by the tide of culture. And so that's my encouragement tonight, is that we would do that and that we would intentionally craft our lives in a way that not only causes us to flourish, but that will create opportunity for our children and the generations after us to flourish. Okay, are there any questions before I disappear? My book is at the back if anyone would like it. It is on sale at the back. And then these ones, if anyone wants to take pictures of them, you can't take them, but you can take photos. And my business cards are at the back if anyone wants to get in touch or anything like that. 150. Yeah, there's Zapper and cash. And if you don't have Zapper or cash and you want to buy one, just grab a card and pop an email to me. Otherwise, Nikki's Gifts at McCurtain, all Nikki's Gift stores stock them. Thank you. Yes, I'll be here. Yes, I'll be here. Yeah, if anyone has any questions.